Now, please welcome to the stage Martin Casado, partner at a16z, for a conversation with Eric Newcomer, the safest stuff we've ever made.
Hey, everybody. Hello, Martine.
Is this working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Yeah, hi.
All right, in your prep call, you called it the safest stuff we ever made. I love that. There's I feel like AI is ruled by fear-mongering, whether it's sort of the existential risks or nearer-term things. Why the safest stuff we've ever made?
Okay, so listen, that title is clearly edgy, right? It's clearly a complicated topic, but I'll make a couple of points. The first one is, we got compute long for a really long time. So much so that we didn't understand what we were building and we killed people, right? There's a very famous paper called Theric 25. If you haven't read it, I'd recommend you read it. It was basically built this medical device. It required thread concurrency. Thread concurrency is hard. It overdosed patients and then they died, right? This is a very well documented study, both clinically, The internet, soon after the internet showed up, we had a new type of attack, right? We'd have viruses, we'd have worms. We actually changed the posture of the United States. We had a new doctrine, so we went from kind of mutually assured destruction to something called information asymmetry, where, if you're using it a lot, you're more vulnerable than a company that's not, right? And so we've seen these epochs of new technologies that are very disruptive. And at those times, you could point to very clear marginal risk changes that resulted in very clear outcomes. But if you look at the discourse around AI, you're well, it drives better than humans, it saves people's lives, and we actually haven't identified a marginal risk profile. And so instead, the discussions around risk are these kind of platonic hypotheticals of non-real systems. And so maybe it is the safest, maybe it's not the safest, but for sure the dialogue is the most ridiculous. How's that?
You guys fought aggressively against the California legislation. Now with the new administration coming into the White House, do you think, those fights are a thing of the past, or how much, I guess in Europe and California, are you still very worried about regulation slowing down AI, and how much time are you going to spend on the regulatory piece?
Listen, I can't predict what's going to happen. Clearly we do need to shift policy, so I'm not anti-policy, right? The reason that I was against, SB 147 is not because it was an AI policy, it was a paradigmatic shift, which how we've treated tech policy in the last 40 years. So I think if you're going to change your paradigm for policy, you should probably have a good notion of marginal risk. You probably should have a good model, right? And if you don't have that, maybe we should draw on the learnings of 40 years, right? So listen, I can't predict how the new presidency is going to change policy. I'm certain we should still both do policy. I think that's a positive thing. And I'm certain that this will continue to happen in California and in Europe, and just hopefully we'll have a bit more sanity around the conversation. Listen, I actually think the Biden executive order was started us down this kind of weird path of making up policy that wasn't all that sensible, that everybody kind of decried as this great idea, which really wasn't. And then afterwards they're oh yeah, we got it wrong, but you always get these things wrong. And we're actually, we don't always get them wrong. Often we know what we're doing. We're just because it's AI, we're being a little sloppy, so let's just bring a little bit of reason to the conversation.
All right, let's talk about the technology. I feel like you're someone really good at zooming out. It feels last year when Cerebral Valley started, it was oh my God, so much money's going into models.
Yeah.
There's been an infrastructure. I have theories. I don't want to. How would you describe this moment, or what's sort of the earned zeitgeist of this moment in AI to you?
So I think it's very hard to reason about AI in general, and everybody tries to do it, and you just can't reduce it to a few aphorisms. So maybe I'll just tell you how I think about it. I think there's kind of two markets that are worth looking at, and they're very, very different. So the one that most people talk about is these large language models. Listen, they're huge, they're expensive, they're great, but it's also kind of a fake market because they're massively subsidized, right? So everybody's the unit economics.
The people who invest in them get revenue back, so they have an incentive to do it.
Listen, if I am Google and I get a 20% uplift on a massive business, that's amazing for me. That would be horrible for a startup, right? And so a lot of people look at these large language models and try and extrapolate that somehow to the startup ecosystem, which is just a nonsensical thing to do. For not only because the type of uplift you need for a larger company is different, but just the level of investment required. And these are backed by companies with hundreds of billions of dollars on the balance sheet, right? And so it's very interesting to track. Some of it is profitable, some of it is not profitable, but you can't like draw a conclusion on the entire industry from like what's going on with these large language
That's
models.
one bucket.
That's one bucket. The second bucket are there's a lot of smaller models that are like in companies that are profitable and as fast as we've ever seen when it comes to growth, right? And these, like think about all the diffusion models, whether it's image or video or speech or music. You're seeing a lot of interesting stuff on the coding side of things. So these models are much smaller. The training time to do them is much less. Like there are many viable businesses today, but for whatever reason, like people conflate these two types of things, and so they haven't, I think, appropriately segmented the market. So I'm very, very bullish on AI as a space. I just think that we need to be a little more reasoned in how we think about it.
Is it good to be a rapper business today? Or I feel like last year there were like that was the worst thing you could say about anybody. But then as the foundation models reached more parity, there were these smaller models, it was cheaper. It was maybe, oh, you need to be more, have sales relationships, understand your customer, and so you could be a rapper. Or how do you think about that tag?
Yeah, I just feel like that, like it's almost a leading question if you use the word rapper. So,
It's like that's pejorative, therefore it's bad. Yeah.
well, no, it's not. I mean, it's not. I just don't think any company would consider them a rapper, even if you called it a rapper, right? So, like, my mental model for this is super simple, which is we kind of see how like the capabilities of these models are scaling. So if you look at a company and the model continues to scale there and like it removes the differentiation, probably not the company you want to build. Now that said, just because you're building an application on top of a model, often, listen, I'm an enterprise guy. Often the enterprise companies over time, like the value is the long tail of customer stuff, understanding distribution, understanding the sales motion, understanding the features, and like that's not something I think a lot of these model companies are going to do. So yes, it is technically a wrapper on it, but if you actually look at the value of the company is the vertical understanding. Does that make sense? So if I come to you and I'm like, the value of my company is I am 10% better than like, O1, then you'll be like, well, okay, like O2 is going to be probably better than that. But if my value is like, I take O1 and I literally solve like this long tail grimy enterprise problem, that's good.
Yeah.
So I think that, and I would encourage everybody here, the mental model should be just keep kind of inching the capabilities of the models. If that erodes the primary use case, then probably not a good company.
Yeah, that's a super smart way of thinking about it. The agent conversation, like, it means a lot of things. It's everything. It's sort of the new magic box. Like, yeah, how would you sort of break down what people are even talking about with agents, and where are you optimistic and pessimistic?
Yeah, so I think the funny thing about agent is like there's this weird conflation that's happened in people's heads, which is like it kind of means two things simultaneously. So sometimes when people say agent, and I know this because I see lots of pitches, and so sometimes when people say it's agentic, what they mean is like it's replacing a human agent, right? Like, and so like it's like a virtual agent, and like therefore it is agentic, right? The other people, when they say agentic like me, just because I've come from more of a technical background, is like I actually have a control loop and it does stuff by itself and I give it high-level commands. These are totally different things, and I think like the discourse around this is like they're somehow the same type of thing. So clearly, like generative AI and large models are good at like stuff that agents have done in the past, right? Like they can discourse in English, like, there's clear use cases, there's clear successes there. So I think that like them standing as agents for use cases makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of discourse on like agentic, which is I've got this fully autonomous, closed system that it goes off and does a bunch of stuff. We're very, very early in that. I mean, like the core technologies, aren't super suitable for like long-term autonomy where they have to bound their own correctness. And so I just think they're both interesting. They're both exciting. The former, you've got more proof points. The latter, I think is technically interesting, but I would say much earlier, certainly when it comes for the companies that are doing it at a traction standpoint.
What, agentic or not, what are the applications you're most excited about at the moment?
I mean, I feel like I repeat myself so much with it, but I'm just going to repeat myself again. So, I mean, there are very clear areas where AI is working, just very, very clear. And for me, it's like the mental model is if you bring the marginal cost of content creation to zero, or you bring the marginal cost of language reasoning to zero, like those use cases are the ones that's really working. So the simplest one that we all know about is like in the creative space. I would say probably dollar weighted, the number one use case of AI is creative composition. By the way, this includes LLMs. If you look at like people like using like LLMs, like like OpenAI, like the number one use case is like, tell me a story. Like it's actually like this creative composition. It makes sense. Like it's hard for humans to create this stuff. Like, I mean, what is the inference cost of creating an image that looks like me as a Pixar character? I mean, for a model, it's like 1/100th of a penny. But if I like paid you to do it, assuming that you're a designer, it'd be $100.
Right.
So you've got like 4 orders of magnitude difference. So anywhere where you can reduce the creation cost to some marginal cost. So what does this include right now? It includes music, it includes sound effects, it includes 3D meshes, 3D scenes, stories, videos, image, like all of that stuff. And like those businesses are working, the business use case is great. There's the second one, which is kind of more of a funky one, which is like, in the history of compute, we've never really solved the emotion problem. Like we kind of solved the entertainment problem, like games are fun, but like not the emotion problem. And like clearly we've cracked that. And like there's interesting implications on that. But we're starting to see like new types of apps where like people are really connected to their computers in ways that we haven't seen, and it's changed social dynamics. And those companies are working. They just tend to be very long-tailed, and who knows why that is. Listen, code is
Okay, yeah, I was waiting to say, if you were going to say
code is
or
code.
not.
Well, like I would say code wasn't working. Like code is really working now, and this to me has been a big surprise. I think a lot of the reason is an area you can actually throw synthetic data. So code is definitely working. And then there's like a lot of like language reasoning tasks in the enterprise, like search, understanding, summarization. They're just starting to work. So I would say the creative stuff, the emotion stuff, the code stuff. Clearly, many companies we can point to. The other like language reasoning, generalized stuff. Like for viable independent companies, we're early, but it's promising.
You're an investor. A core question is, where will the value accrue? Or like, what is your read on which layer, which part of the stack is going to make the most money? I mean, you see this sort of debate happening around how to value OpenAI, right? Brad Gerstner made this case that it's all about ChatGPT uptake and not about the model. Like, yeah, how do you think about which startups are really going to make a lot of money in the long term from what's happening in AI right now?
Yeah, this is a complicated question. So I'm gonna answer it in two ways. I'll try and be kind of quick on this. So the first way is like, one thing that's nice about being an investor, and trust me, I did 10 years of like doing my own company. Like it's a very different thing, is you can actually place multiple bets. So the way that I view it is like, I don't even want to guess. Who knows? It's a complex adaptive feedback system. I will have an investment on every layer and let the margins kind of play out.
That sounds like my summary of the Andreessen philosophy. We'll just bet on them all.
Listen, we're not like markets are very, very tough. If you've got a big enough checkbook, you really should just let the margins kind of play out. Honestly, so that's my true answer. But I will tell you one thing that I have learned on defensibility, because there's all these stupid canards like, oh, models aren't defensible, and like the models will be commoditized. Like I just don't think people really understand like how these companies work. So here's what we've learned, which is models are magic, and they definitely solve your customer acquisition problem. So if you create a new model, at least now, and you put it out there, people will use it because they're these just kind of new ways of interacting with computers. So they solve the customer acquisition problem, but they don't solve the customer retention problem, and they never have, like, as far as we can tell. So you'll get a bunch of customers, and they'll kind of drain off or whatever. However, companies that have figured to convert that customer acquisition into a more traditional retentive, like workflow, two-sided marketplace, long-tail integrations, they solve the retention problem. So I think there's kind of two, like let's say you're a founder, I think there's two problems to solve. There's the customer acquisition, which AI does a great job, but that doesn't save you for having to solve the retention program. So listen, I am very bullish. We're gonna see a lot of companies on Gen AI that, will get customers and retain customers in many different areas. And I think value is gonna accrue all up and down the stack, just like it did, all up and down the stack, just like it did with networking.
I don't think I've said AGI yet today. What is this current state of play in your view right now in terms of whether we're close to AGI? You have no idea. You don't even try to like invest around it. It's like it's
I don't
non.
Well, okay, maybe if you can define AI, maybe I can tell you what I think about it.
Right. I mean, some people say like it can do 80% of human tasks better than humans.
Yeah, but for every task, listen, we've been better at humans for handwriting detection for 10 years. We've been better than humans for object identification for 10 years. We've been
right. There's definitely an argument that we're sort of in AGI now.
At chess for 30 years.
Right. Well, there's an argument that we've sort of reached it, but we don't want to give it credit.
Yeah, I know. This is what I'm saying. Listen, there's this canard for a good reason in AI, and the canard is as soon as the computer can do it, we don't call it AI anymore, right? And then we did that with expert systems in the 60s. We've done that with search. We've done that with vision. It's just, I think this is one of these moving target type things. What I will tell you is a human brain can look at this world and it can abstract you as like individual people, and it has those objects, and it can create relationships between you. It can create a language on top of that, and it can reason over that, and I don't think models can do that. I think humans can do all of that. Humans can write those things down, and then like a model can like read that and do smart things, but I don't think we've solved that piece yet. And I think like there's a split faction on this, and I just tend to be on the side that the humans are doing kind of the hard work, and the models are like consuming that work, and then like using that to do new things.
Martin, thank you so much.
Hey, it's a real pleasure. Thanks everybody here.